Hello, everybody, and welcome to City Lights Live. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis, and tonight we are delighted to have with us Chukwuebuka Ibeh celebrating the publication of his brilliant new debut novel titled Blessings. It's published by Doubleday Books. We have had our eye on Mr. Ibeh's writing for some time now, sharing an enthusiasm with many of our colleagues in the trade about his work. We are thrilled he could join us tonight. Before we get started, as always, I'd like to acknowledge we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ohlone peoples. I would like to take this moment to offer our respect to those who came before us as stewards of the land. Chukwuebuka Ibeh's work has drawn attention from many quarters, and for good reason. In his exquisitely composed and deeply emotive debut work, he gives the reader a glimpse into the life of a young gay Nigerian man coming of age in an environment where the persecution of gay citizens is part of the fabric of daily life. In Blessings, Mr. Ibeh explores a range of emotions, showing us how in the face of severe oppression, self-actualization and the emergence of love can flourish despite the odds. Mr. Ibeh is a fantastic storyteller, and we're delighted to be able to welcome him at the beginning of his career. Mr. Ibeh is originally from Port Harcourt, Nigeria. His writing has appeared in McSweeney's, a New England Review of Books, and Lawway, amongst other journals. He is a staff writer at Brittle Paper. Electronic Literature has profiled him as one of the most promising new voices of Nigerian fiction. He has studied creative writing under Chimamanda Adichie, Dave Eggers, and Tosh Ah, and is currently an MFA student at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Joining him tonight in conversation will be Francesca Ekwuyasi. Miss Ekwuyasi is an award-winning artist and storyteller born in Lagos, Nigeria. She was awarded the Writers' Trust Dane Ogilvy Prize for her debut novel, Butter, Honey, Pig, Bread, published by Arsenal Pulp. She's also co-authored with Roger Mukin the book Curious Sounds, a dialogue in 3 movements. Her work has appeared in Malahat Review, Transition Magazine, Room Magazine, Brittle Paper, amongst many other journals and magazines. So please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Chukwuebuka Ibeh and Francesca Ekwuyasi. Such a pleasure to have you both with us, and welcome to City Lights.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just first want to let everybody know I'm swatting away mosquitoes. That's what's happening. I apologize. I did not expect this, even though maybe I should have. But when you see me do this, it's just mosquitoes. Please forgive me. I'm so thrilled, so honored and excited and grateful to be in conversation with Chukwuebuka Ibeh because I read this book a few months ago. I'm reading it again now. I'm on vacation, which is why I'm outside. I'm reading it again now, and I mentioned to him earlier, I'm falling in love again. It's a stunning book. So, anyways, all that to say, I'm excited to be in conversation with you today to discuss blessings. Um, Chukwuebuka, how are you doing?
Very well. Thank you so much, Francesca. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Um, do you go by Chukwuebuka or Ebuka?
I go by both, but
Okay.
yeah, actually both. But for the most part, my family and friends just call me Ebuka.
Okay, what are you most comfortable with for this conversation?
Ebuka is fine.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's nice to see you. Um, so I don't know if I told you, I'm in an area of Quebec right now, 6 hours from Montreal, called I think I'm on a lake called Lac aux Saumons. It's beautiful, but it's really in the elements. I've seen leeches and dragonflies, and I'm being haunted by mosquitoes right now. Where are you?
I'm actually home. I'm home in St. Louis.
Okay.
Been traveling a lot, but kind of. So I think I fell ill on one of my travels. I'm still in the
Oh,
recovery phase. But I'm just
I'm
happy to be
sorry.
back home. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that you felt ill.
thank you.
Um, can I ask you, I'm always curious with writers and storytellers in general, like how did you become who you are, you know? Do you mind sharing about that?
Um, I really don't know. It's that I think that for as far back as I remember, I've always just been interested in storytelling in some way. Maybe not necessarily writing as I don't think writing was like the very first storytelling medium that came to me. but storytelling came to me somehow. So what I used to do as a child was that I would tell the stories, orally. I would because I come from a family that told stories. My grandmother used to tell me a lot of stories. And so the older I grew, I would tell I then became the one who told my family stories. And I would also tell my classmates stories. And there was something very intoxicating about the power of inventing stories, like inventing lives and lived experiences on the spot. And especially, I think I got a power trip from the attention that I brought, the way people listened. And it seemed like in that moment when I was telling the story, I was a creator, I was in charge. I had people under my spell, so to speak, as corny as that sounds.
It's
Um,
not corny, it's so real, it's intoxicating.
So I think that was the early stages of it, and then of course the older I grew, the more I wanted to do that, and it changed to writing at some point.
Cool. You said your grandmother's a storyteller. Are you from a big family?
Well, extend I do have a big extended family, but um my nuclear family isn't that my immediate nuclear family isn't that big. Growing up, I did grow up with a lot of, well, not a lot of, but at every point in my growing up, I believe we had a couple of extended family members living with us, which is like a very typical Igbo family thing.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily say I grew up in a large family just because it was more a thing of our immediate nuclear family and people just coming and going.
Hmm. And you're the main storyteller. Is anyone else pursuing writing or anything in the arts?
Um, Unfortunately, no.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my elder brother used to be a wonderful artist when we were younger. He could draw life drawing. He could draw like a life-size figure or something. And he was really good at it, but he dropped it at some point and just never picked it up. I tried. I've been trying to get him to get back to it, but it's just his way past that now, sadly.
Yeah. Yeah. I ask because I'm always curious about what, informs. Are you for a writer? I happen to know some things about your I guess your writing training, but I would like to know like what other writers or thinkers or artists in general or family members really inform your approaches to storytelling.
Yes, and I've actually been very so when I was growing up as a child, I and I guess this is probably the case for many writers was that I read everything I could find. Um, and luckily I had a dad. My dad owned a bookstore, so
Really?
yeah, yeah,
In Port Harcourt?
in Port Harcourt, yes. So
Wow.
I had access to dozens of mostly secondhand books. And I would read everything. Like I was at maybe 10, I was reading books that I had no business reading.
Oh my God, same.
Um, and so I remember early on I read every genre too. I used to be such a huge fan of the American author Tammy Hoag or Hoag. I don't exactly know how it's pronounced. I was a huge fan of Sidney Sheldon, and these are like my early loves. Um, but then
You
I
said
also I
Sidney
also
Sheldon, and I just went way back. Like it just takes you way back to secondary school.
yeah. And then I also had such a huge admiration for, and still do have a huge admiration for the author Buchi Emecheta. You mentioned Chinua Achebe earlier on, who I also have a lot of respect for. And then later on, as you said, I went to study with. I discovered the work of authors like Chimamanda and Ngozi Adichie in my later years, whom I love and loved back then, and studied under her. So that she's also like a huge influence. I also really admire the writers Raymond Carver and John Palahiri and Zadie Smith. I just think that I learned something that I learned something that I want to co-opt in my own writing from each of these writers, and they've all come together to sort of make me the writer that I am today.
Yeah, when you first started saying that, you said most writers, and I would relate, and I really do relate um to kind of the writers that you or driven by writers that you're attracted to, how they inform your work is quite instructive. I like to, right now I'm reading I've been reading this book for a very long time. It's called A Black Gaze. It's a slim art book by Tina M. Camp. And the way she uses language, like I'm reading it over and over because I want to use language in the way she does. And she's writing nonfiction she's an art historian, right? But there's something in there that I seek to emulate. So yeah, definitely I hear you on
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Okay, blessings. Where did that come from? Where did this story come from, these characters? Because I have to tell you, um, Uzoamaka, I feel the fierceness of her love. So when I read books, I mark them up, like I highlight and underline the parts I like. And the first thing I underlined, I have to show you, I think it's page 15. The first thing I underlined is when I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but this is on the back of the book, so it'll be easy. But when Anozie, the first time he hits sweet Obiefuna, and his mother gets between them, and it says it was then that Uzoamaka wedged herself between them and dared him to lay a finger on her son one more time, telling him to wait and see if she would not feed him his own penis. And I wrote, she loves fiercely with a heart. And it's like I said, it's wise, it's rich. It's like I believe this so well. You've written this woman so fully. So yes, back to the question, where did this come from?
Yeah. I just wanted to comment about the scene you just talked about. I think for me that scene was very important to write because not only did it show not only was I trying to show the fierceness of her love, I think I was also trying to show the lengths that she would go to when he's been threatened. Because her behavior takes Anozie by surprise because that's not who she typically is. That's not the kind of thing she would typically do for anything else. But she's doing it now for her son. And I wanted to show to show that she will do this if her son is harmed. But where do the characters come from? It's oh my god, where do I even begin? It's with Obiefuna, I wanted very much to write about just a Nigerian boy who is growing up in Nigeria at a time like this. And I wanted to use him as a way to showcase the humanness of being queer. I just think that many times in Nigeria in particular, I don't. There's such an active issue of erasure going on, and it just seems to me most times like Nigerians don't even see queer people. Even the discourse, the language being used to discuss queerness is often dehumanizing, but also just absent. It's like there's something very animalistic about the way that queer people have been spoken about. And it's almost as if many Nigerians just refuse, either it's ignorance or just a deliberate refusal to acknowledge even the possibility that a gay person can actually just be literally, a next door neighbor. So I wanted, I think, to show like your typical, next door kind of young man growing up, somebody that everybody in Nigeria knows that they grew up with, who is also queer. So to just shake off that idea that queerness is something that exists in a sort of fuzzy place, which is really what I think that most Nigerians think about queer people. Or that I think many Nigerians also think that to be gay, you have to be a certain thing, a certain way. Like when they think of somebody who is gay, there's a particular image that comes to their head, I think. They
Like
don't quite
Festus.
exactly. So I wanted to use a beautiful night thing to show all of that. To show just the ordinary human. Not to say, of course, that Festus is not to say that Festus is less relevant than Obiefuna, but also to show
But
that
beyond the stereotypes.
exactly. Uh, um, um, and then I also, so for Uzoamaka too, I wanted this novel very much to be like a dual perspective novel of a son and a mother. And I wanted to center their voices. I wanted to center the mother's voices as much as I was centering the sons, because I wanted also to
Mm.
explore that idea of how is your very traditional, very conservative world rocked when you discover that your son is gay, and how do you move on from that? Like, how do you
Mm-hmm.
handle that? How do you navigate that? the so-called unconditional love that you have, how
Mm-hmm.
much can you stretch that love when you're faced with
Mm-hmm.
this reality? I think
Mm-hmm.
all of that was what I had in mind when I was creating this character.
Mm-hmm. You know, thank you so much for that answer. And there's so many things I want to hone in on. The first thing that comes to mind is, that's one of my questions was how you've dissected it, the dual perspectives, mother and son. And I was curious about if you had considered father and son or all three of them and how different they would be. Because one of the things that struck me about Anozie, actually both Anozie and Uzoamaka, is like they love this boy. And there's one of the final scenes with Anozie, not the end, but where he asks, he's like, "Who broke your heart?" And he's like, "This thing you're doing is illegal now, right?" And it's like that love, that his violence, and this is not excuses, but I've just seen it so much. His violence is like an attempt at protection. He was trying to protect his son, right? And even the part earlier on where Uzumaka was like, but she wishes he was a bit more conventional. Like as a queer person and I growing up, like I'm so beloved. I have no doubts of how beloved I am. I mean, I do mentally, but if spiritually, I have no doubt. But my grandmother just really needed me to be different. Like I also grew up in a big extended family. She needed me to be different. And so reading both Anozie and Uzumaka express that, I was just like, yeah, I know this thing. Like so many and different out of love, different because they know the world is hard, and you capture that so beautifully, right? In both parents. Um, and I think it was just really interesting the way gender kind of informed their expression of that, how Uzumaka versus Anazie's gender informed how their culturally shaped gender informed that, right? But yes, why mother and son versus mother, father, son, or father and son?
Oh my goodness, that's such a good question. And and yes, because I actually did, which is this is probably the very first time that I'm saying this, but I actually did consider father and son. When I set out to write the novel, I actually did think of initially how differently would this novel read if it was a father and a son, as opposed to a mother and a son. And ultimately, I don't even know why I eventually went. But I also think you're right. It's the culturally informed gender roles, because I think that this novel is about, among other things, about masculinity and about the performance of masculinity, I think. And I also think that it's easier, I think, for women to in Nigeria to be it'll be I just think it will be somewhat easier, for instance, for Uzumaka to, especially given the cultural context, to show more empathy than Anozie. Because
Mm-hmm,
for Anozie,
mm-hmm,
among other things, showing that level of empathy would also be a sign of weakness, or
mm-hmm,
which of course would be threatening to his masculinity. And
mm-hmm,
when you take away for many for many men in Nigeria, when you take away their masculinity, it's very frightening for them. So most of what Anozie even does is sort of performative. Most of his violence is also sort of performative. It's not because it's not,
mm-hmm,
which again is not making excuses for him, but it's also he's
mm-hmm,
doing these things in addition to wanting, quote unquote, to help his son. He's also doing it because he feels like this is what he should be doing. This is what the father should be doing
mm-hmm,
for his son, as opposed to what the father wants to do. Um,
mm-hmm,
and I wanted I as much as I know he's not clearly not my favorite character, but I also wanted to show that he genuinely believes that what he's doing is in his son's favor. He genuinely
yeah,
believes that he's trying to help his son. And yeah, so I didn't want to write a stereotypical British brutal father who's like unfeeling and
mm-hmm,
hard. I wanted to show that sometimes people do things, people hurt people that they love, and for some twisted reason, they actually think that they're doing it for the best reasons. It ends up, of course, not providing the best
mm-hmm,
results, because it was never going to provide the best results anyway. But the point is that they really believe that they are trying to help, and just how
mm-hmm.
sick and damaging that can be.
And there's a line though, which I think just really carries everything you said just now, where his father's like, "Oh, people think." And that's kind of what it comes down to. What will our community think? What will
Right.
our neighbors think? What will people think? Even though he was so beloved.
Yeah.
Obiefuna was so beloved. Like I love how you captured that. I thought it was so beautiful. Like from before he was born, he was so beloved and he was so lovely. He was loving, you know. Um, and he was bullied and so it's funny, his father's wanting to protect him from his gift, which is to be lovely and beloved and loving, you know.
Right.
Yeah. I'm Yes. Oh, another thing you said was like the erasure of queerness. You know, this book, I feel like it's in conversation with two, three other books, I think. One is very different, of course, but Under the Udala Tree, because it's like the queerness within very specific Nigerian cultural context versus diasporic queerness, which is what I like to write about, right? Where it's easy to say, oh, well, this person is queer because they went abroad, right? But your novel Under the Udala Tree, it's like it's at home. It's not imported, right? It's the most African it can be. Another book I think is And Then He Sang a Lullaby. I actually met, I think his name's Ani Kayode. I met him recently in Germany, and I was like, you need to talk to Chukwuebuka Ibeh. I was like, you both need to have conversations about your books need to talk. And there's another writer actually named Vincent Anozie. I know, ironic, but similarly queer Nigerian. Um, and I just think your characters need to hang out. I do. It's so cool. It's a particular, I don't know, the Nigerianness of it is it's authentic, and the it's impossible to erase that is what I'm trying to get at. It's impossible to erase that or claim that it's an imported sort of thing. Um,
Yeah. I
okay.
mean, yes,
Um,
it's because that's the idea. It's that it seems to me like there's often like a constant refrain that people would tell you. It's almost like a chant at this point. People would say, "Go to America," or just trot out the idea that queerness is un-African, it's imported. And I'm like, first of all, the idea of importing queerness, and it's just so funny to me because it's like you import it and then sell it in the market. It's just not true, right? So, which is why blessings this novel felt very important for me to write, to show that unfortunately, well, I guess unfortunately for them, it's homegrown. It's really not imported.
and the moments of tenderness between Aboy and, am I saying it properly? Aboy?
Yes, that's correct.
Aboy and Obiefuna, like when I read the back of the book and I finally read the part, I'm like, that's all. They looked at each other longingly, but like the fact that his father Anozie recognized it immediately, recognized it from when the boy was a baby, right? And Uzoamaka recognized it when she saw Aboy, when you wrote it, this flash of recognition in her mind. That was so beautiful. I was so close to tears when she ran down to give him money. But it's like they recognize it, right? Like, why can we recognize it if it's foreign? Otherwise, we're just like, I don't know, you're weird, but it's like, actually, we know innately what it is. Um, anyway, thank you for going on that tangent with me. Will you please read us something?
Of course, absolutely. Right. So you don't have like a preferred scenes?
No, I want to hear your preferred, where you like to read from. Actually, maybe your favorite part.
Oh, my favorite part is actually oh, can I even find it now? But it's the scene where Obiefuna is playing with his brother. Well, no, it's the scene where his brother is trying to teach him how to jog and he's failing. If I can remember where that is. Oh, another thing I also like as well, Obiefuna meets Obiefuna is introduced to a girl for that he has like a brief crush on but doesn't quite follow it. I could read that.
Okay.
Right. So my edition, it's on page 175, and I'll just start from a conversation.
Okay.
Okay. Good run, Willie said. Thanks, you too. At first, I thought you were going to win, and I wasn't going to have it, so Obiefuna stood upright and looked Willie in the eye. Willie caught the look. I'll go, he said, heading up. As Obiefuna walked back to the sidelines to watch the remainder of the races, he heard his name again, this time in a feminine voice. He turned in the direction of the sound and was mildly alarmed at the sight of a group of girls clustered around the laboratory. From afar, he could spot the famous bee occupying the center of attention, as expected. Who could possibly know him? He stood watching until one of the girls emerged from the group and began to move towards him. It took him a moment to recognize Rachel. Obiefuna smiled. How much had she changed in just less than 2 years? From the slight, unassuming girl he had seen that day with Senior Kapilo to a rounder, fleshier young woman. Not the prettiest of girls, but she held her own. Her name was not unknown on the boys' campus. Rachel, he said, resisting the urge to hug her, aware that eyes watched them from all over. Ha, Obi, you've grown so tall. She was laughing her cackling laughter, looking at him in wonder. Even her shyness was gone. You don't ask of me again. Haba, Rachel. Ezioku, she snorted. You don't look bad at all. It's your small biabia. She reached out to tug at the sprouts of beard on his jaw. I was just telling my friends how wonderful you were on the track. He chuckled, pleased. Thank you. How are you? She asked. He shrugged, trying to sound at ease. I'm better now that you've asked to see me. She pulled a face. Oh, but it wasn't me who asked to see you, she said, tilting her head slightly in the direction of the group, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Obiefuna looked over at the group and almost smiled at how swiftly they averted their gaze. He tried to guess from their body language who had asked to see him, but they all seemed identical to him, or maybe he was no good at reading these things. When he looked for too long, Rachel slapped his arm lightly. Ah, Obi, be a guy man. You don't stare at a lady so openly. Which of them? He asked, returning his gaze to Rachel. She clucked her tongue playfully, enjoying her role as the potential matchmaker. The one in green. There are three girls in green, Rachel. She rolled her eyes. The beautiful one. Obiefuna looked over at the group again, laughter bubbling in his throat at her insinuation. But it died down when he saw what she meant. Even from a short distance, he was awestruck by the roundness of the girl's face, setting a fixed smile as she listened to B. Her hair cropped close to her head, her slender curves outlined in her sportswear. How could he not have noticed her earlier? He saw now that it was she, not B, who commanded the group's attention. The mini circle seemed to have formed itself around her. So Rachel dragged out the word. You want me to go talk to her? Obiefuna cleared his throat. The sun burned the back of his neck. Sure. Rachel winked at him and headed off. Obiefuna felt a rush of gratitude for having applied general deodorant that morning before the race. Even though he was soaked with sweat, he still smelled good. He watched as Rachel spoke to her group, her back turned to him. She gesticulated intermittently, not turning to him once. None of the girls glanced at him as he spoke, until he began to wonder if she was even talking about him. He did not understand the need for a lengthy explanation when everything was supposed to have been prearranged. Finally, the girl did look at him, and from afar he felt a weakening in his knees. He took steady breaths for when she would walk over to him, but it was Rachel who turned and walked back to him, half jogging the distance. She has agreed to talk to you. He stared at Rachel in blank confusion. The realization came to him gradually. Although the girl had sought him out, she needed to feel chased. She was giving him the hint to take the first major step. Think of stopping.
That
So I
is
think,
one of that is, I love that scene so much. And it really leads perfectly to my next question, which is you just so beautifully capture a sense of place. I went to QC, I went to secondary school in Nigeria
oh,
until I was about 17. And it's an all-girls school, very different from what you described. But what you described brings to mind stories my brothers would tell. My oldest brother went to boarding school in Ejaniki, and I actually dug ear the page the description of the campus with the jagged, oh yeah, the building stood about in the jumbled arrangements as if there had not been a plan, and most had been erected as an afterthought. The the jagged bottles on the rooftop with security. Oh, even the what's his name? What's his name? I forget Mr. Josiah. Was it Mr. Josiah? No,
The
the guy,
Guardian.
just not the guardian, but the person who was checking his luggage before his very first
Oh,
day of
right.
school. And you wrote there was an almost deliberate disorderly vigor to the way he overturned the neat folds of clothes. Just the general anyhowness, was it captured so beautifully his anxiety at school, the dynamics between the seniors and the juniors, even even the iron. One of the students with the scar. Sorry for anyone who hasn't read this book. We might be referencing things you don't know yet, but it's exciting and you should read it. But even the scar of the iron, my brother literally told me a story like that. And again, this scene where he's checking her out, it's a house sport was the only time like other students came to campus and there were sometimes boys on campus. And it was like, it really is a vibe. You captured it stunningly. So my question, oh, pardon me. I feel like I'm just gushing, but I do have a question, which is just craft wise, in terms of technique, how, how have you done that?
Well, thank you so much, Francesca. Um, uh, Please, I don't even think it can be overstated just how important place is to this novel. I mean, it's about place, because I think that the queerness in itself is a big deal because of Nigeria. This novel would obviously be much more different if it were to be set in the US, for instance. So place just has to be important, and of course, the boarding school is also a very significant place for Obiefuna to be, not only because that's where his father sent him to, as some sort of punishment. So it's some sort of conversion camp in theory or in practice, but also because it's a I think the Nigerian boarding schools in particular are very interesting places to be. So it was in crafting the place. It was very interesting going back. I had to sometimes even call up old classmates that I haven't spoken to in years, just to catch up, in hopes that I would, jog up memories from my time there. Because I also went to a boarding school, so thankfully, most of my evocation of place was set in memory or experience from what I remember. And I tried as much as I could. I went over several drafts trying to make sure that I was getting it, I was capturing it as vividly as I remembered it. And thank you, apparently it worked. But I also think that boarding school is such an interesting place to be in because first of all, it's that I think the teenage age is such an interesting age because it's when
It's so
a group of,
potent.
yeah, and for both positive and negative reasons because there's so much energy in that age, but not enough mental development to use that energy for good. So I often joke sometimes that I don't think there's an age where you you can express the most good or the most evil as to that age, that teenage age, which is when and so to be which is why I just think that the Nigerian boarding school system is so flawed because we're teenagers are at this age where their brains are not fully developed, and yet they have power, and you're putting teenagers in charge of other teenagers. What do you think is
It's
going
so
to
Lord
happen?
of the Flies. It's so Lord of the Flies. And you
It
know what?
is.
When when I was reading it, so his father suspects, his father recognizes something and is like, you know what? Let me send this boy who I suspect is queer. Let me send him to a boarding school with other boys. I'm just like, sir, just think it through. It's so funny. Like it's even called like a seminary school. I'm like, oh God, like think this through. Um, that's the gayest thing. You just threw him with other essentially children, right? Like his 16, 17 is children all lumped together. So many hormones and rules and like corporal punishment. It was bringing things back, all the flogging. Um, but yes, it was very successful. You captured the sense of place, and I was wondering. I was like, I wondered if you were pulling from memory because it's so you just capture the granular details, you know. Um, yeah. Okay, I have to look at my notes for my next question because I got carried away with all the gisting. Um, okay, so place. Oh yes, another craft question I have is the characters that I mentioned earlier are so real. Can you talk about your approach? Yeah, from a craft perspective.
About the characters.
Yeah, like writing fully developed, fleshed out characters, and I don't want to. It's not that they're done with so little detail, but this book is not like a super dense book, but the characters feel so real. And when I say this, I'm really thinking about Uzoamaka. I am, but I'm also thinking about the way you introduce, the way you open the book, right? It's like this evil apprenticeship. Like you put in so much detail in a moderate, regular amount of space that gives so much depth to the characters. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the similar to your, I think it's a very fair question that you had introduced, because one of the main questions I get often is, wait a minute, that's it, regarding Obiefuna and a boy, the apprentice. People are like, wait a minute, wait, that's it? I mean, because
He
I
was
think that's the,
he was a catalyst. We just needed him to like. It's okay.
which has been my response. It's that it wasn't the book was never really meant to be a love story. At least not with a boy anyway. If it's a love, if you're looking for a love story, then maybe towards the end of the book. But so a boy was, it's nothing about gay awakening. Somebody has to be your gay awakening, which really was what a boy was. I'm sorry that he was set up in a way that that had all the butterflies going and people wanted longevity. But my thinking is, I was like, for some reason, maybe because I read the book, I was actually surprised that I wanted to make a point about homosexuality versus homoeroticism. Because in my thinking, at least the way I envision a boy, I don't even necessarily think a boy is gay to begin with.
I don't even think
Um,
our boy is thinking about that. He's just like, oh, this is something. And feeling is
exactly,
feeling. He's going to move on with his life.
exactly. Yeah, it's yeah, because I also think yeah. So I because I've had readers who say, for instance, that they were so disappointed that a boy betrays a Obiefuna, and gets with a woman. And for me, it's not quite the same as the later part of the book that we know where Obiefuna's partner, with what happens with Obiefuna's partner, so we don't spoil the book. But because in a boy's case, it's um I don't want to say a fling, but something like that. But for Obiefuna, that's like, because it's Obiefuna's affection that gives it meaning. In itself, especially from a boy's perspective, it's not necessarily a thing. But anyway, to answer the question about the characters, it's Obiefuna is me in some ways, or at least oh no, wait, not actually. I'm not quite as cool as Obiefuna, but what I want to be, what I would like to be when I grow up, so to speak, or a more interesting version of me. And Uzoamaka is also, I think the characters are somewhat in some ways aspirational. Uzoamaka is also what I wish for.
I want to ask every author, but I never want to like impose this thought, like, project this thought into your mind. But since you started it, I just wonder if every character is you because I feel that, every character must have an aspect of you, right? I'm
Yeah, yeah,
asking, sorry.
yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think yes, an aspect, not quite an aspect, yes, but not quite, because it's first of all, like, the truth is that I had a way less interesting experience in boarding school than Obiefuna did. In fact, in my case, actually, my brother was even there already. I had an elder brother in boarding school. I had an elder brother in boarding school, so I had quite an easy ride, so to speak. I didn't suffer. So I had to write the character of Obiefuna and to write other characters. I actually borrow from what I saw rather than what I experienced. Um, but yes, but of course, Obiefuna is also mean in many ways. So is Uzoamaka really too, because what connects me with these writers, among other things, is just my longing for what should be rather than what is. Apart from Anozie is not me in any way.
I feel like, actually, I was, projecting onto every character. And if I was a traditional Igbo man, Nigerian man, I can see that being me. I can see that being
Yeah,
like, just be normal, please. Like,
yeah,
just be how everyone expects you to be, which sucks, which is like really painful. I made a note about like, my heart, it really hurt my heart when, he was told he was being sent to away instead of going back home. And I underlined, actually, I have to read it to you just so you know how much it means to me. I underlined and I wrote homophobia, queerphobia, rejection, where he was being the message. I forget it, but I can't find it now. But it was something like he knew that his punishment would be ongoing and sustained. That sort of interminable punishment for who he is. And he knew that once he was told. And like the wounding from rejection, right? Um, I forgot why I mentioned that now. I was going to make a point, but you wrote it beautifully, I suppose is what I'm trying to say.
thank you.
Oh yeah, Anozie, yeah, Anozie's rejection of him was it felt like a reflection of Nigerian society, Nigerian society's rejection of queerness and just like put it away, right? There's
Yeah.
some people, public figures where I'm just like, that person is gay, right? And people are like, no, no, absolutely not. And I'm like, what? Are we delusional? Like, are we just prepared to ignore what? Like, it's fine. Maybe they're not, but like, queerness as a spectrum beyond like that includes gender expression and gender diversity, right? So even a heterosexual, effeminate man, like that's it. Can we name it? Can we see that without it being shameful? That queer erasure. It felt like correct me if I'm wrong, but I was kind of sort of seeing that reflected the microscopic version of a larger societal thing. Am
Yeah.
I? Am, am I
No.
reading too deeply? I might be reading too deeply.
No, absolutely not. I think you're right. I think you're right.
um, yeah, okay. So my final question before I want you to read again, and then I have two more questions for you, is what you're on a tour. You've been meeting lots of readers, lots of other writers, I assume. What do you wish people would ask you about this book or about your practice as a writer?
Hmm. It's it frankly, it just seems like everything has been covered. People have asked me from quite directly. You were even being polite about it. People have directly asked me, "Are you Obiefuna?" But I will say that one very um moving really question that I was asked was in Abuja of all places when I was in Nigeria um touring for the book because I had been nervous about the book coming out in Nigeria and what the reception would be like. And so it was published in Nigeria, and luckily I was in Nigeria around the time it was published in Nigeria, so I went on tour. And when I was in Abuja, we had this um old man in the audience. And of course, first of all, touring in Nigeria is scary enough, and having an elderly man in the audience adds another layer of fear because which population is much conservative than an older one? So I was prepared when we're having all the discussion. I was prepared that at some point he would stand up and tell us that we were all going to hell. Um, and when the time for the Q&A came around, he raised his hand, and I thought, oh, here it comes. But no, he stands up and he says, what do I think that the older generation can learn from the from us, basically? What do we think that we can, what do I think that he can learn from me? In a way that was so empathetic and is actually wise and open to conversation. And that completely took me by surprise. So if if anything, that made me not judge a book by its cover. And it also gave me hope. Like I was so nervous about the book coming out in Nigeria, and the response that it has gotten in Nigeria has been hopeful. So I think that more than makes up for whatever questions that I've been expecting that hasn't come. Although there's none that I can quite think of right now. It was such a wholesome experience, and I think about it from time to time, and it makes me, if there's any reason to be optimistic, I look to that.
I'm really happy you had that experience. I'm so happy. That's really cool. I
Yeah.
think, I haven't lived at home full time since I was 17, and for the last 2 or 3 years I went home and like there was just queer people out and about and queer youth. Like a bunch of queer youth came up to me and said, I like your book, I'm gay. And I'm like, you're telling me, a stranger? Like I was like, don't shh, don't let people hear. So
Yes,
it's pretty
I also had a similar experience when I was signing to people would, which just makes it worth it. People would come up, and say, some would even say, I'm a writer too. I don't think I could ever write this. Just
oh
because, I don't think I could ever write or publish, at least not anytime soon. But I am so grateful that you did, and I am so grateful that this book exists. And other people would come up, and say, this character is me. You came into my life and you wrote about me, and that makes me happy. But yes,
yeah.
and I mean, wasn't it just recently in Lagos during the Pride Month that there was like that there's several balls, just it's hopeful, I think.
It's amazing. I'm jealous because I was, I my life was very different as a youth at home. And so I'm jealous, but in a great way where I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I wish I was, and just to be clear, like the reason I didn't ask you if when I is you is because I don't think he's you. I think you're a writer and you've crafted because you're skilled and trained and dedicated. You've crafted these fully fleshed out characters. And because, I also like to write now and then, um, I know how I sometimes put things I want to explore into fictional characters and kind of process it through them. But I
Mhm.
don't ask writers if it's veiled fiction because I'm like, no, I trust that you're good at your job, which is to tell a story.
Right, right.
Um, will you read us another passage, please?
Of course, of course. Oh, and this time around now, I would just go straight to, I'll just read from the beginning of the novel, chapter one. But Hackett, 2006. In October, he came. His arrival was without forewarning, without ceremony. A slight rap on the door that mild evening, just as the sun was making a final appearance before retiring. And there he was, in his bathroom slippers, hefting a Ghana Moscow sack on his shoulders, next to Obiefuna's father, Anozie, both looking weary from the long travel. When Anozie had talked about getting an extra hand to assist in the shop, Obiefuna had not known what to expect. But somehow, it was not the tall figure who now stood hugging his bag to his chest, a slight downturn to his lips as he stared at his dusty feet. He towered a foot above Obiefuna's notably tall father, but it was the even darkness of the boy's skin that made Obiefuna's eyes linger on him a while longer when he opened the door to let him in. The boy seemed undecided. Sorry. The boy seemed undecided whether to follow Anozie inside or turn and head back the way he had come. He stepped in after a moment's hesitation, tactfully shrugging off Obiefuna's attempts to help him with his load. Welcome, Daddy, Obiefuna said, not taking his eyes off the boy. Anozie grunted a response. Where's your mother? He asked, settling on the sofa with an exaggerated heave. The journey from their hometown of Ibuku lasted no less than 6 hours on average and had the ability to leave a person feeling thoroughly incapacitated. Asleep on cue, Obiefuna's mother Uzoamaka emerged from the kitchen. She halted at the dining table and looked straight at the new boy, sitting with his head slightly bowed on a stool opposite Anozie. She took note of his bags and the situation in one appraising glance. Welcome, she said to Anozie, and nodded in response to the boy's prompted greetings. Get me a cup of water, Anozie told Obiefuna. He avoided Uzoamaka's eye. Exactly a week ago, he had traveled to Ibuku to attend the town union's development meeting in his capacity as the assistant secretary. and was not expected home until tomorrow, and certainly not with an extra. He waited until Obiefuna returned with a glass of water, and he had drunk from it, setting the glass on the table before turning to face Uzoamaka. This is a boy. Remember him? The late Okeze's third son. He's just finished secondary school and wants to learn a trade. His uncle followed me home after the meeting and begged me to take him in. Everyone thinks he will learn fast. Uzoamaka looked across the room to access a boy again. He sat with his legs slightly spread apart, crossed at the ankles in front of him, then circling his bags protectively. He pulled them towards him as Uzoamaka studied him. The crinkling of the sack filled the quiet of the living room. Obiefuna, show a boy where to keep his things, Uzoamaka said, finally, in English. A boy looked startled to hear his name, but he rose from the stool and walked down the short length of the living room, following Obiefuna through the corridor and into the small bedroom he shared with his brother Ekene. There, a boy finally let go of the sack, watching as Obiefuna put it away in the wardrobe. Obiefuna turned to a boy because he had said something. What? Where's the latrine? He repeated in Igbo. Latrine? He nodded and, taking note of Obiefuna's confusion, made a slight squatting posture. It took Obiefuna a moment to understand. Oh, you mean the toilet? He asked. A boy hesitated and then nodded again. Come with me, Obiefuna said. He led a boy out of the room, back into the corridor, and pointed to the door of the toilet at the far end. A boy walked with uncertain movements to the door and prized it open with a cautious push. Obiefuna wondered how long he had been waiting to go. Had he endured the long journey from the village with full bowels? A boy inspected the bathroom with a perplexed expression that prompted Obiefuna to step into the toilet and tap at the water system, proceeding in halting Igbo. This is where you sit and do it, and then you flush the bucket of water. Understood? A boy seemed to give it a moment's thought, and then he nodded. He turned to Obiefuna with what Obiefuna would regard in retrospect as his first full smile since his arrival. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's such a strong intro to a novel. Like it just, yeah, I think it was very successful for me. As a reader, I was like, yeah, I'm in the first time I read it. Yeah. I want to ask you two more questions and then we'll open to the audience. If anyone has a question, no pressure, but it'll be cool if you want to. The first one was you write sex so well. Like it's like even Obiefuna's first time with Angel, where I was uncomfortable. I was like, no, I don't know about this. But you wrote it so beautifully, like his experience, like his physical experience of like having sex for the first time was so touching. And then his with his Senior Kachifo or Kafo, Senior Kafo.
Signor Papillo. Oh, okay, Signor
No,
Kachi, yeah,
so
Signor Kachi.
Kachi, yeah, Senior Papilo. It's just sort of this like lingering. It was very homoerotic, and also
Yeah.
to me, even though it was really challenging for me as a Nigerian to I read it as sort of kinky, this like punishing dynamic. But I was just thinking like these boys don't know what they're engaging in some like interesting, intense power play and it never gets sexual. I thought that was really funny. Um, but yeah, with Kachi, even his sexual experiences with Kachi when he first realizes like, oh, this guy is like he's avoiding me. Like this thing we're having is just he still had his agency because I have to be honest, I was prepared for someone to have a bad time. I was feeling so protective of Obiefuna. I was like, oh my God, I hope he doesn't. But it wasn't like that. He was just like, oh, I'm just being used. But he enjoyed himself, you know. I thought that was interesting. Was that your intention? I'm just realizing my read on it might be completely off. Was that your intention?
So with Angel, for instance, it's not up to be for now. It's I mean, I suppose it is, but it's also he has to do it
Yeah.
because for Senior Papillo's approval. So
Mm-hmm.
he allows himself to be essentially abused just so he
Mm-hmm.
can be in Senior Papillo's grace. And I wanted to show that. I think I also wanted to show that your body's response to something doesn't mean that you're into it.
Exactly.
Um, and then with Senior Kachi too, it's I think it's that too. It's that Obiefuna is, because one thing, he's a teenager, but he's also sort of um he's learning basically. That's the thing with this environment. It forces you to grow up, like literally grow up. So he very quickly recognizes that he's being used, which is sad. But in the meantime, it's almost like he's going to take what he can get. And it's, I mean, it's agency, but it's also a kind of it's also the same thing with Festus. It's agency, but it's also some kind. Is it what's this word? Is it this when
Like
you enjoy
reclaiming
self torture,
self-harm,
self harm, something like that,
or
because it's
masochism.
masochism. That's the
Yeah.
word. That's what I was looking for, because it's that it's this is unhealthy for him, basically. This relationship
Mm-hmm.
is unhealthy for him, and he knows that he's come to the
Mm-hmm.
realization that it's unhealthy for him, but he's going to go along with it anyway. It's part agency and also part masochism, because it's like he's going to
Mm-hmm.
subject himself to this for pleasure, but also just to humiliate himself just for humiliation's sake.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, he's learning. Like
He's
he's so
learning.
like the first, because the first time with Kachi, he was thrilled, he was elated, he was excited, and then it dawned on him during the day that Kachi was avoiding it, like that change, and then the way he continued to go, but was sort of feeling revulsion. Um, oh, and I love when he went to find Kachi and saw Festus. That the final line of that chapter, looking, I think was like Festus is looking pleased with himself. I was like, yeah, Festus. Like I love Festus personally. Like I
I
love
do
that
too.
sort of like when when he's being taunted, he's like, even you after last night. Like it's like, yeah, surviving how they can, I think, is what was coming to mind around those
Exactly.
first sexual experiences. Yeah, the angel scene, I was like, I don't know. I won't be able to find it now, but I'll email it to you. It's a line about a 13-year, like a young boy's first sort of like sexual. It's written by, I can't remember, but there was the way you wrote about the Obiefuna's body responding, that was like poetic in the midst of this like, oh, I don't know, Angel, maybe you should have, because Angel was hesitant, like, girl, maybe you should have followed that hesitation and
Right.
said no.
Right.
Um,
But I also do think that just the idea of sex, and thank you, I didn't I that's such a huge compliment, because I think sex is quite hard to write. But I also do think that obviously sex is, especially for a growing teenager like that, when the hormones are flying, sex is such a potent thing. Whether it's sex with someone else or masturbation. But I also wanted to show ways in which for Biafuna also it's I wanted to build up on that, the ways that he has these relationships and these sexual habits that are not necessarily very healthy, which then I wanted to show the change when he gets into what is a semi-healthy relationship. Because even scenes like when he's in the bathroom and his mother is next door and he's trying to basically ejaculate himself or jack himself up. And it's grief because he's thinking about it's a mix of future grief for his mother, but also the chaplain and all of that is coming together. And then when he's in shortly before he meets his eventual long-term partner, when he's in that 1 year toxic relationship where he knows that he shouldn't be, but at the same time he's going along with it. I think I wanted to show where Obiefuna has this moments when he just thinks that he doesn't deserve um healthy things, he doesn't deserve good things. So he's just going to almost deliberately go along with things that are harmful just so he
mhm,
can feel something.
mhm. Yeah, I was thinking just about like how like release and the body's responses. Like when you said grief and eroticism, oh, you didn't say grief, but you said grief, and I was thinking of the it just can get really complicated. And I like that we're watching him or we're growing with him from teenagehood to adulthood, right in that moment when his body becomes kind of his sexuality becomes this like complicated thing in his life. Um, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I thought you wrote the sex beautifully. Even the complicate, even where the question mark sex, where I'm like, is this good? Like you wrote it so it was like visceral and poetic, I guess.
Thank you.
I think my final question before we open to the audience is, okay, this is an incredible debut. What next? I'm so sorry to do that. Because I'm sorry to do that, but I have to know. Because I'm excited for it.
You are my publisher. Um, well, yes, I am in the very, very, very early stages of a second novel. It's still really hazy up there. I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing just yet. Interestingly, I was actually just even going over a scene this afternoon. But what I do know for now is that it's obviously set in Nigeria. It's about a historical Nigerian figure, and but it's not, it's about the Nigerian figure, but it's told from the perspective of his children, his fictional children, who are sort of looking back in time to piece together the fragment of their histories, because this historical Nigerian figure was executed by the Nigerian government. So they're trying to understand how he lived, but especially how he died and why he was murdered.
I have questions. I won't ask them now. Um, I have so many questions. But thank you so much. This has been a true delight. Um, it's funny, I keep forgetting that there's an audience because I feel like I was just having a really genuine conversation. But thank you so much for your generous answer. And would you like to, I was wondering if you would like to choose what questions you would like to answer. If folks have questions, please put them. Can decide what questions to answer.
Mhm. Sure. Because I'm using a mobile phone, if I open the comments, I wonder if I open the comments, you'll still be able to see me. Do you think?
I think let's try because I'm
Can you
also
see
using
me?
my cell phone. I can see you. Yes.
Wait, okay, good. Sure. I think I can take a couple. A couple of them are comments. I think a quote that stayed
Okay.
with me was, "A home is the last place a child should feel conditionally loved." I'm so glad and now I'm so proud of myself for putting that in the book, because that because that seems to be the sort of the crowning quote of the book. It seems to be the quote that many people resonate with. And yes, it's, I mean, it's for me, it's like the whole sentiment of the book, that the world is hard enough. I don't think a home should be. And I think that's what Uzoamaka also feels. I think Uzoamaka comes to that realization shortly after the death of well, not that she comes to that realization, but she comes to terms with it shortly after the death of this man that she admires, or she admired when she was growing up. And she, I think she, it's almost, it's part fear too, because she's now worried for her son and what could possibly become of him if this game of chicken continues. Um, Someone also said the scene where the slippers that were left out at night went back to the owners. That was such a
Yes.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
You did not
I
want to. Yeah.
someone turned their camera on. Do you have a question? Tago Tagoe?
You just read out the question and
Great.
answer.
Now I can. Yeah. And yeah,
Okay,
you
okay.
can, you're free to read out the question. I just wanted to say hello because it's a bit odd to have you just looking at the blank boxes. And thanks for such a lovely and very personal feeling conversation.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, you have such a lovely background.
Ah, thank you. Thank you. This is my home in San Francisco. So just a little bit of San Francisco while you two are spread out all over the world.
Oh, and look at that sun. I should move to San Francisco.
Come visit.
And thank you for
All right.
sharing your face. It's really kind.
I know.
Thank you.
Okay, well, so the question says, thanks for a great conversation. Thank you. Based on the excerpt you read, the act of seeing or being seen plays a large role in the novel. Can you talk a bit more about why sight is important to the story you're telling, And what other senses interest you? Oh my God, that is such a good question. And fun fact also, Obiefuna was an optometry student, which is, I suppose, the branch of medicine that deals with the eyes. So he's basically studying um something that has to do with the eyes, which is about seeing. I So the Igbo word for love is, interestingly, Ifunanya, which it's I guess when translated means love, but when literally translated means to see someone with the eyes. Because I think many Igbo people, I suppose, believe that to love someone, to claim that you love someone, is to be able to see them, like really see them, whichever way that they appear, which I think is the central idea, I think, of the novel. It's that for these parents to claim that they love their child, then they have to be able to see their child for what the child is. So you have to see people for what they are, not what you want them to be. You can't you can't love an idea or an ideal of your child. You have to love the child for what the child is. Is what I think the central idea of the novel is. And so I mean, thank you so much for saying that, because I wasn't even like deliberately thinking, oh, I'm going to write a novel about people seeing each other. But I think it comes across, and it hopefully comes across anyway, because I think that's just the central idea of the book. The ability of people to see people if they claim that they love them, to be able to, and in seeing them, what that really means is being able to accept people the way they are rather than the way you want them to be.
That is amazing. And yeah, I haven't read the book yet. I'm so excited to read it. But it was really clear from the way the excerpts are about like seeing something in someone else's face, right? Or like how someone responds to something that they've seen. So yeah, that's incredible to hear about. And I'm just curious, like what other senses are you inspired by? Like what else do you draw from when you're writing?
Oh yes. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, that was the second part of the question. I missed it. Yes, I think also the sense of touch, I think, was also very potent, especially for people and especially in boarding school. But the sense of touch, unfortunately, both positively and negative, because there's a lot of actual physical violence that, well, not a lot of. Let me not scare you off from buying my book, but but there is violence. There is some degree of violence in the book, which is touch, so to speak. But Obiefuna experiences that kind of violence from while when even when he's at home from his dad, and when he's in school from the senior students. And then of course he also experiences another kind of touch, which is romantic, when he's in a relationship with Sparrow, for instance, which is a character in the novel, or from his later partner. So I would suppose that the sense of touch is also another sense that I'm usually interested in exploring, because touch is also one way that people show affection. Not necessarily sex even, but just feeling, so to speak. What are the senses again? Sound, sound, because music is very important in this book. Obiefuna is a dancer, and it's one of his strengths. It's one of the reasons also why he's bullied by his dad, because his dad would prefer him to do something more physical, something more masculine, but he prefers to dance to music. So I suppose that's another sense that I'm interested in this book. Well, thank you. That's such
There
a
are
really good
lots
question.
there are lots of like knowing glances or recognitions of things in people's eyes, which I love. That it's also, like I guess in North America they call it gaydar, right? There's a lot of that sort of like being like, oh,
I see
oh,
you. I see you.
yeah, I see you, Ifunaya, yeah. Ifunaya is such a beautiful name. I didn't know the literal translation actually.
Yeah.
Mm.
I don't know who came up with that word, but the person was really into something.
Mm. Um, yeah, well, I don't know if there's any more questions.
I really want to thank you both for your generosity and for gracing our virtual halls. Mr. Ibeh, congratulations on a fantastic debut. And City Lights is proud to be featuring Blessings. It is quite an achievement. And as Francesca said earlier, I mean, no pressure, but we're looking forward to more. And Ms. Ekwuyasi, we appreciate you doing the honors tonight. You made the perfect interviewer. Your enthusiasm was so awesome and infectious, and we're very, very grateful to you. And of course, to all of you who joined us tonight in the audience, you help complete the circle as always. Also want to remind everyone, we have posted links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase books. Better yet, if you're in the neighborhood, come on down, pay us a visit, browse our stacks. We are one of the great browsing bookstore experiences. We're located in San Francisco's historic North Beach district. We're open 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And today's program has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti. So thank you so much. Very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. True pleasure. I mean it very much. I highly recommend this book to everyone. It's beautiful. Chukwuebuka, thank you. And I'm so excited for more. And thank you so much to City Lights. How fun. Oh, and forgive my mosquito swatting, camera dropping ways. It's not always like this.
I know, and forgive my switching device mid-interview, mid-discussion. It's not always like this.
Oh, thank you. Have a good evening, everyone. Chukwuebuka, I'll be in touch.
All right. Thank you so much. Goodbye, City Lights. Bye, Francesca.